In 1864, a shocking discovery was made in the basement of a Georgia plantation. 23 children, all locked away. They shared the same unique look: high cheekbones, light green eyes, and reddish-brown hair with golden streaks. Union troops broke open the heavy iron doors of the Thornhill estate in Burke County. Inside, they found the children grouped together in the dark. The youngest was just 4 years old. The oldest were nearly teenagers. The eldest, a 13-year-old girl, said something to the soldiers that turned the stomachs of even the most hardened men. "Mistress calls us her legacy," she said. "She told us we can never leave. We are her blood." The event is mentioned just one time in the military files of the 34th Massachusetts Infantry. It was in a private letter that stayed hidden in Army archives for more than 100 years. If you look at the local history of Burke County, Thornhill Estate is missing, as though the place and its owner were never real. But they were. What Katherine Thornnehill did in the 16 years after her husband died, right up until the soldiers came, is one of the most chilling parts of America's past. She built a methodical program to breed human beings, making new generations of enslaved people who could not be freed, because they were related by blood to their enslaver. As we get deeper into the story of Katherine Thornnehill and the horror she made in rural Georgia, please do one thing. If this story is making you uneasy, subscribe and hit the bell icon for more videos. We explore the hidden dark parts of American history, the accounts left out of school, the secrets kept in old courthouses and lost Army files. I'm also curious about where you are watching from. Leave a comment to let me know your city or state. Are you anywhere near Burke County, Georgia? Does your own town have dark secrets hidden in its history? Let's explore this. Now, we will return to the start. It began on a freezing February morning in 1847. A new widow took control of a failing plantation and came up with an idea that would curse the region for decades. The winter Katherine Danforth Thornhill's husband was buried was the most frigid Burke County had experienced in 2 decades. Her estate, Thornhill, was a 1,700-acre property on red clay ground, 7 miles southwest of Waynesboro, the center of county government. In 1847, Burke County was known for cotton, but it wasn't as rich as areas further west. The ground was exhausted, worn out from too many years of farming just one crop. Places that had been successful in the 1820s were barely surviving by the 1840s. They were trapped by low cotton prices and high expenses. The war with Mexico had taken workers, and arguments over new territories were splitting the community. Thornhill Estate was once one of the most successful properties in the area. Katherine's husband, Jonathan Thornnehill, got it from his father in 1838. It came with 42 enslaved workers, decent tools, and debt that could be managed. But Jonathan was a bad planner and a heavy gambler. By the time he died from a fever in February 1847, the estate had huge loans against it. The fields were growing just enough to feed the workers, and the people he owed money to were closing in. Katherine was 28 when her husband died. She had married Jonathan at 19. It was a practical marriage set up by her father, Theodore Danforth, a well-known merchant in Augusta. The Danforths were from an old, wealthy Georgia family who had come in the 1730s. Katherine was taught by private teachers, spoke some French, and was raised to run a large home. What she did not plan for was to be left with a failing plantation, massive debts, and a 16-year-old stepson who seemed to despise her. Richard Thornnehill was Jonathan's son from his first wife. His mother died when he was born in 1831, and Jonathan married Katherine 5 years later. Richard never liked Katherine. He saw her as an outsider who had taken his real mother's place. He was a moody, quiet boy who hid in the estate's little library, staying away from his stepmother and the work of the plantation. Katherine thought he was weak, unrealistic, and far too soft toward the enslaved workers. He once said they should be taught to read, an idea so risky that Katherine banned him from ever saying it again. The plantation itself showed its poor state. The main house was a 2-story building made of white brick with 6 columns on the front porch. It was built in 1805. Paint was chipping off the window frames, and the roof was leaking in 3 spots. The furniture was a mix of old family items and cheap replacements bought after the good things were sold to cover gambling debts. Behind the main house were the kitchen, the smokehouse, the dairy, and the overseer's house, all in bad shape. Further back, past a row of oak trees covered in Spanish moss, were the cabins where the enslaved people lived. In 1847, 31 people were still on the property. 11 men, 13 women, and 7 ch. Children, 16 others had been sold in the past 3 years to pay Jonathan's debts. The ones who were left knew that more sales were on the way. Fear was everywhere, like a thick fog hanging over the quarters. Katherine spent the first month after Jonathan's death in a state of quiet rage. She spoke with the estate's lawyer, Ambrose Talbot, who told her the hard truth. She could sell the land and the remaining workers to pay the debts. She might have a little money left to live simply in Augusta with her father. Or she could find a way to make the plantation earn money again. Talbot thought this was impossible given the cotton market and the estate's condition. Katherine hated both choices. Going back to Augusta meant accepting defeat, living as a dependent in her father's home, known as the widow who lost her inheritance. But she also knew that farming the old way wouldn't save Thornhill. The land was worn out. The tools were old. The few enslaved workers left were not enough to make the cotton fields profitable, and she had no money to buy more. It was during one of these long nights, looking at the estate's books by candlelight, that Katherine thought of her plan. The idea came to her with the sharp logic of someone with no other choice. If she could not buy workers, she would create them. But not in the messy way most plantations did, giving small rewards for couples to have babies, and then waiting 15 years for them to grow. No, Katherine pictured something much more orderly, more controlled. She would make a group of workers who were biologically connected to the estate. They could never be sold because they were her own family. They would have a natural loyalty to the plantation because it was in their blood. The plan was horrifying, but to Katherine it was also smart. She was still young enough to have children. She would pick the strongest, healthiest men from the enslaved group and have children with them. These children would be raised knowing who their mother was. They would be treated a little better than the others to make sure they were loyal. When they were old enough, they would be matched with other enslaved people to make the next generation. In 20 years, Katherine figured she could have a workforce of 50 or more, all tied to Thornhill by bonds stronger than legal papers. She started a journal to plan the details. This was not a diary for personal thoughts. Katherine was too practical for that. Instead, she made what she called her cultivation records, full of math, notes, and plans. She wrote in a simple code, swapping key words with farming terms. Children were seedlings. The men she picked were rootstock. Pregnancies were plantings. The journal pages were filled with charts that looked like diagrams for breeding animals because that is what they were. Katherine's first choice was a man named Isaac. He was 24, born on the plantation, and known for his strength and calm nature. She called him to the main house one evening in March 1847 after the other workers were in their cabins. What took place that night was written in Katherine's journal only as, "First planting complete with rootstock 1, weather clear and mild." 3 weeks later, she called him again, and then 2 more times that month. By April, Katherine was sure she was pregnant. She wrote this in her journal with the same lack of emotion she would use to note planting cotton. Initial cultivation successful. Anticipate harvest in December. Richard Thornnehill first thought something was wrong with his stepmother in late May of 1847. He saw she had stopped her morning rides, saying the heat was too much, even though the Georgia summer was just beginning. She ate in her room more often and had sent away the house servant who normally helped her, choosing to handle things herself. For a woman who cared so much about how things looked, this retreat was strange. But it was a talk Richard overheard in early June that truly worried him. He was in the library, hidden behind a tall bookshelf, when Katherine met with Miriam Grayson in the next room. Mrs. Grayson was the local midwife, a sharp-looking woman of 50 who delivered babies for both white and enslaved families in Burke County. Richard knew who she was. She was known as a good midwife, but also as someone who didn't ask personal questions and kept secrets. Absolutely. "You're positive about your condition?" Mrs. Grayson asked in her quick, professional voice. "Quite positive," Katherine answered. "I expect it will be sometime in early December. And Mr. Thornhill died in February, you said." There was a silence. Richard pushed himself flat against the bookcase, barely breathing. "My late husband and I were together in January," Katherine said calmly, "just before his last sickness." "Of course," Mrs. Grayson's voice had a hint of something, not doubt but careful quiet. "I will need to check you, and we must talk about the arrangements for the birth. Will you need me here at the house?" "I will, and I will need you to be discreet, Miriam." "Absolutely, you have it, as always." Richard waited until both women left the room before he came out of his hiding spot. His hands were trembling. The math was wrong. His father had been sick in bed for all of January, hardly awake most days, shaking with fever and chills. Richard had sat with him many nights. There was no way his father and Katherine could have been together. This meant the child Katherine was carrying was conceived after Jonathan's death, in March or April, with someone else. The meaning of this made Richard feel sick. If anyone found out Katherine had a child outside of marriage, the scandal would ruin the small bit of family reputation they had left. The people they owed money to would seize the property right away. The Danforth family in Augusta would cut her off. But even more than the practical problems, Richard was disgusted by the lie itself. Katherine planned to pass this child off as his father's rightful heir, to lie to everyone to build her future on a fraud. He thought about his choices. He could face Katherine directly, but he was just 16 and she had all the legal power. He could go to the lawyer, Mr. Talbot, in Waynesboro, but he had no proof. It would be his word against hers, and as a boy, his words wouldn't matter much. He could write to his grandfather Danforth in Augusta, but Katherine checked all the mail that left the estate. Instead, Richard started to watch Katherine closely, searching for proof, trying to figure out her plan. He noticed she called Isaac to the main house often, always at night, always when the overseer was in town or busy somewhere else. He saw that Katherine's behavior toward Isaac was different from how she treated other enslaved workers. Not nice exactly, but less harsh. She spoke to him in full sentences, not just short orders. By July, Richard was sure Isaac was the father of Katherine's child. This new understanding filled him with dread, not just because she had broken social and legal rules, but because of what it showed about Katherine. She had coldly and purposefully decided to have a child with an enslaved man, to claim that child as her dead husband's, and to keep this lie going forever. What kind of person could plan such a lie? He found part of the answer in early August, when Katherine took a rare trip to Waynesboro. Richard had been looking for legal papers about the estate. He hoped to find something he could use against Katherine. That's when he found a leather-bound journal hidden in a locked drawer of her desk. The lock was easy enough for a determined 16-year-old to open. The journal was in code, but Richard had always been good at puzzles. It took him 3 days, working in secret whenever Katherine was gone, to figure out the simple code. What he read made his blood turn cold. Katherine wasn't just having an affair with Isaac. She was running a planned breeding program. The journal explained it all in scary detail. Her plan to have many children with certain enslaved men, to raise those children as part of the plantation's workforce, and in time, to breed those children with each other and with other enslaved people. This would create a growing group of workers who were genetically linked to Thornhill estate and to Katherine herself. There were charts, math on expected births over 5-year periods, notes on which men had good physical traits, and thoughts on whether things like strength, smarts, and personality could be passed down. It read like a manual for breeding farm animals, except the animals were people. Richard copied several pages from the journal, changing the code into plain English. His hand was shaking so much he could barely write. This was the evidence. This was proof of Katherine's sickness. He could take this to the authorities. He could expose her. But that night at dinner, Katherine looked at him with her cold green eyes and said, "Richard, have you been in my study? Some of my papers look like they've been moved." "No, ma'am," Richard lied, his throat tight. "I keep certain papers locked for a good reason," Katherine went on, cutting her food with perfect motions. "If I ever learned that someone had invaded my privacy, broken my trust in such a basic way, I'm afraid I would have to take very serious steps. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good, because family loyalty is the most important thing, Richard, the most important. Without it, we are just animals attacking each other." She smiled, but her eyes stayed cold. "I know you loved your father. I would hate for his memory to be dirtied by a scandal, especially a scandal coming from inside his own home." The threat was clear. If Richard tried to expose Katherine, she would find a way to twist it, to make him look like a troubled, angry stepson making up lies about a grieving widow. Who would people believe? A respected plantation owner from a good family, or an awkward teenage boy known to dislike his stepmother? Richard went back to his room that night and burned the pages he had copied. But he kept watching Katherine, and he started to feel very, very sick. It began with feeling tired. By September, Richard was exhausted by the afternoon, unable to focus on his books. He lost his appetite. He started getting headaches that made it hard to think. By October, his muscles felt weak and he had pains in his stomach. Katherine acted very concerned. She made Richard stay in bed. She made his meals herself, bringing him soup and soft foods. She called Mrs. Grayson to check on him. The midwife, who also acted as a doctor since there wasn't a real one, said he had nervous exhaustion, maybe made worse by consumption. She told him to rest, get fresh air when he could, and take a special medicine that Katherine got from a store in Augusta. "Tuberculosis often hits young men who are sensitive," Katherine told Richard, fixing his pillows with great care. "Your father had a cousin who died from it at your exact age. We must be very careful." Richard knew she was lying. He had read about arsenic poisoning in the library. He recognized the signs in himself: the tiredness, the stomach problems, the weak muscles. Katherine was slowly poisoning him, making murder look like a disease. She was getting rid of the one person who knew her secret and could stop her. But he was too weak to fight, too alone to get help. The house servants did exactly what Katherine said. The overseer hardly ever came to the main house. Richard's room was on the 2nd floor, and by November, he barely had the strength to get out of bed, let alone run to Waynesboro. He made one last try to expose Katherine in late November. He wrote a letter to his grandfather, Danforth, in Augusta. It took him 3 days to write it, working a few minutes at a time before he was too tired. He described Katherine's breeding program, her journal, and the poison. He sealed the letter and gave it to a young house servant named Pearl, begging her to mail it in Waynesboro and not tell Katherine. Pearl took the letter, but she also told Katherine. She was scared of what the mistress would do if she found out Pearl had kept a secret. Katherine read the letter without any expression. Then she burned it in the fireplace as Richard watched. "You're very sick, my dear," she said softly, almost kindly. "The fever is hurting your mind. You're seeing things that aren't real. It's truly a blessing that you won't have to suffer much longer." Richard Thornnehill died on December 3, 1847, 3 weeks before he would have turned 17. Dr. Samuel Pritchard from Waynesboro, who was called to record the death, wrote consumption as the cause. He noted that the young man had faded away with awful speed. Katherine cried politely at the funeral. She wore black for a whole year. 4 days after Richard was buried, Katherine gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Jonathan after her dead husband and said he was born a little early, which answered any questions about the timing. Not many people in Burke County bothered to count the months back from the birth to when Katherine's husband died. The ones who did kept their thoughts to themselves. It was not something people talked about. The years from 1848 to 1856 changed Thornhill Estate in a way that seemed like a miracle to people on the outside. The plantation, which had been close to failure, slowly got back on its feet. Cotton harvests got bigger. The number of enslaved workers grew. Katherine Thornnehill got a name for being a smart, though quiet, plantation owner who ran her property very well. But that success came at a terrible price that no one else saw. Katherine had 4 more children between 1848 and 1853. Daughters named Elelena, Abigail, and Margaret, and another son she named Samuel. Each birth was handled only by Miriam Grayson, who was now a deep part of Katherine's plans. The midwife was paid very well for her work and her silence. She got regular payments much larger than her usual fees, plus a small house on the edge of the Thornhill property where she could live for free. Mrs. Grayson's job was not just to deliver Katherine's babies. She also had a darker task, to make sure that enslaved women on the property only had children that fit Katherine's careful plans. When pregnancies happened outside of Katherine's control, and they did because people will always form bonds and relationships, even in the worst situations, Mrs. Grayson provided herbal mixes that caused miscarriages. She did these procedures in a small room behind the overseer's house, far from the main house and any witnesses. The women who were forced to have these abortions rarely talked about them, even with each other. The pain was deep, a sadness they could not express in a system that already denied them control over their own bodies. But secrets still moved through the quarters, stories of women who were pregnant 1 week and bleeding the next, who were told they just lost the babies, even though everyone knew Mrs. Grayson was involved. One woman named Ruth attempted to fight back. In the spring of 1851, she was 5 months along. Katherine found out the father wasn't the man she had chosen. The real father was a young worker named Samuel, whom Ruth genuinely loved. Katherine commanded Mrs. Grayson to end the pregnancy right away. Ruth fled. She got almost 4 miles away, deep in the pine woods, before the overseer's dogs found her. They pulled her back to Thornhill. 2 men held her down as Mrs. Grayson forced the medicine on her. Ruth lived through it, but a core part of her was destroyed. After that, she worked like a machine, barely talking. She died 2 years later when sickness spread through the quarters. She was only 24, but Ruth's story was just one of many. By 1856, Katherine's program had made 7 children of her own, all being raised in a strange middle ground. They were legally enslaved. Katherine had filed the papers in the county, claiming they were born to enslaved women on her land, which made her their legal owner. But in reality, they lived in the main house, wore good clothes, ate better food than the other enslaved children, and were taught by Katherine herself. Young Jonathan, the oldest, was 8 years old in 1856. He was a serious, quiet boy who looked just like Katherine. Same green eyes, same red hair, same sharp face. He had no memory of his father, Isaac, who had been sold to a plantation in Alabama in 1849. Katherine found Isaac's presence a problem once his job was done. The money from selling him helped pay off more of the estate's debts. The younger children had no idea who their real parents were. Katherine told them they were lucky orphans she had taken in because of her Christian goodness. She taught them to read and write, which was dangerously illegal in Georgia, where teaching enslaved people was against the law. But Katherine was sure no one from outside would ever come into her home and find out what she was doing. She was shaping them, getting them ready for the next part of her plan. But that part required her to be patient. The children had to be physically grown before they could be used for breeding. Katherine kept her careful records, noting their growth, their health, their personalities. She noted which children were physically strong, which seemed smarter, which were easier to control. She was planning their matches years in advance. In the meantime, she kept having children herself. 3 more were born between 1854 and 1856. Sons named William and Henry, and a daughter named Caroline. Each one had a different father, picked carefully from the enslaved men on the property. Katherine's standards were purely practical: physical health, strength, good teeth, good vision, no clear problems. She did not care about their personalities. They were to her just genetic material to be used. The men themselves had no say in it. When Katherine called them to the main house, they went. They knew that saying no would mean a terrible punishment or being sold. Some of them understood what was happening, that the children Katherine had would be their own, even though those children would be raised to see Katherine as their savior. The mental pain of this was awful. They were forced to be fathers to children they could never claim, never raise, and never protect. One man named Thomas was called to the main house in 1855. He was 26, married to a woman named Hannah who lived in the quarters. Hannah was pregnant with their first child. When Thomas learned what Katherine wanted to use him for, he tried to say no. The overseer, a cruel man named Virgil Kane, had Thomas whipped in front of all the other enslaved people. He was given 39 lashes that scarred his back forever. Then Katherine had him brought to the main house anyway. Thomas did what she said. He had no other choice, but he never told Hannah what happened in the main house, and Hannah never asked. Some truths were too awful to say out loud. By 1856, Thornhill Estate held a group of people that looked normal from the outside, but was really organized by Katherine's twisted ideas. There were the field workers, about 20 adults and their children who worked the cotton and corn under the overseer. There were the house servants, 3 women and 1 old man who cooked, cleaned, and kept the house. And then there were Katherine's special children, 10 of them by 1856, from 8 years old down to a baby. These children held a strange place in the plantation's order. The other enslaved people disliked them for their better treatment, but also felt sorry for them because of what they stood for. Everyone in the quarters understood, at least partly, what Katherine was doing. They didn't have words like eugenics or breeding programs. Those words would be invented later. But they saw the pattern. They saw how Katherine kept care. Full records of the children, how she measured them, how she wrote about their growth in her locked journal. And they waited with a kind of terrified curiosity for what would happen when these children grew up. Because everyone knew what Katherine planned. She had made it clear in small ways, in things she said and orders she gave. These children were being raised to make the next generation of workers. They were pieces in Katherine's long-term plan to make a workforce that could never leave, never be sold, because they were genetically tied to her and to Thornhill. It was a terrible sin dressed up as a new idea. But in the lonely world of a Georgia plantation in the 1850s, with no one watching from the outside and all power in the hands of the owner, Katherine was free to follow her vision. The only person who might be a threat was the lawyer, Talbot, in Waynesboro. He handled the estate's legal work and could see records that might raise flags. But Talbot was a practical man who liked clients who made money. And by 1856, Thornhill Estate was starting to make money. The cotton harvests were better. The workforce was growing through Katherine's program at no cost. Debts were being paid. Talbot didn't ask hard questions because he was benefiting from Katherine's success. The plantation's isolation helped keep the secret. Thornhill Estate was 7 miles from Waynesboro, linked by a bad road that was often blocked in winter. There were few neighbors. The closest plantation was 3 miles away. Katherine rarely had guests and did not encourage visitors. When she did see other plantation families, usually at church or at events in Waynesboro, she acted like a proper widow, running her husband's land with Christian goodness and smart planning. No one guessed the methodical horror happening inside the white brick walls of the main house and in the cabins beyond the trees. And even if they had guessed, would they have done anything? This was Georgia in the 1850s, a society built on the cruel use of enslaved labor. Katherine's program was more orderly, more coldly planned than most, but it was not really different from what was happening on thousands of other plantations. That was, perhaps, the most awful part of it all. Katherine's breeding program was evil, but it was also logical inside a society that already treated people as property to be bought, sold, and bred as one wished. She had simply taken the basic idea of slavery and followed it to one of its most terrible conclusions. But systems built on such deep wrongness carry the seeds of their own end. Change was coming to Georgia and the entire South, though in 1856, few could guess how soon or how violently it would arrive. The late 1850s brought more stress to Burke County and all of Georgia. The question of slavery moving into new territories was the main topic in national politics. The violence in Kansas, where pro-slavery and anti-slavery groups were killing each other, was talked about nervously at the Waynesboro courthouse. The 1856 election, which made James Buchanan president, did nothing to fix the deep problems tearing the country apart. Katherine ignored politics. Her focus stayed on Thornhill Estate and her long-range program. By 1859, her oldest children were becoming teenagers. Jonathan was 11, Elelena was 10, Abigail was 9. They were still too young for the breeding part of Katherine's plan, but she was already getting ready, already picking which of the enslaved young women would be right for them when the time came. It was during this time that Katherine built what she called the Heritage Room in a part of the house that wasn't being used. She told the house servants it was for storing family papers. In truth, it was a monument to her breeding program. The room had no windows and was lit by lamps. The walls had shelves, and there was a big table in the middle. On the shelves, Katherine kept her coded journals, 3 volumes by 1859, which listed every birth, every pairing, and every note about the children's growth. She also kept small glass bottles, each with a name and date, holding locks of hair from each child. These were set up in rows, sorted by generation and parents, a physical collection of her genetic tests. On the table, Katherine had drawn detailed family trees in ink. They didn't show real family ties, but her planned matches for the future. Lines connected names with notes about what she expected. Strong body, good teeth, smart, easy to control. It looked like breeding charts for show dogs, but the names were human. Abigail paired with Thomas's son, Jacob. Eleanor with Isaac's son, Marcus, who would be born in 1862. Margaret with Samuel's nephew, Peter. Katherine spent hours in this room, planning for decades, dreaming of a Thornhill populated by 100 or more workers, all related to her, all tied to the land by blood and mind. In her head, she was making something new, a plantation that would never have work shortages, never need to buy new workers, never risk mass escapes, because the enslaved people would have nowhere else to be. They were, in the most real sense, family. Making this vision real meant Katherine had to control the plantation's social life even more. She started to split the children into groups based on their purpose in her program. The special children, her own, kept living in or near the main house. The other enslaved children were kept away, sleeping in the quarters, working in the fields as soon as they were able. But Katherine needed these other children, too. They were needed for the genetic mixing she planned, so she started a system of careful manipulation. She offered small rewards to families who agreed to her matches and threatened to separate or sell those who fought back. The mental pressure was huge and never-ending. A woman named Violet, a mother of 3, was put in a terrible spot. In 1860, Katherine decided that Violet's oldest daughter, a 14-year-old girl named Sarah, should be matched with an older field hand, a man in his 30s named Elijah. Sarah was terrified. She was still a child, and Elijah was old enough to be her father. Violet begged Katherine to wait to give Sarah more time. Katherine's answer was cold. "You have 2 younger daughters, Violet. Would you rather I sell them to fix this, or will Sarah do her duty to this estate and to you?" Sarah was paired with Elijah that fall. She had a daughter 9 months later and died from problems during the birth. She was 15 years old. Violet never got over the loss. She kept working like a machine, talking to no one. In 1862, she walked into the Savannah River and drowned herself, but sad stories like Sarah's and Violet's were not seen by outsiders. When visitors came to Thornhill, which was not often, they saw a well-run plantation with tidy fields, a large house, and workers who seemed to be fed and housed well enough. The horror was hidden, buried in the quarters, locked in the Heritage Room, and coded in Katherine's journals. Then 1860 came, and everything changed. Abraham Lincoln was elected president. South Carolina left the Union in December. Georgia left in January 1861, with men at the meeting in Milledgeville voting 208 to 89 to leave the United States and join the Confederate States of America. War started in April with the attack on Fort Sumter. At first, many in Georgia thought it would be a short war, just a few months, and the Confederacy would be independent. But the war continued through 1861, into 1862, and through 1863. Young men from Burke County went to fight in Virginia and Tennessee. Some came back in coffins. Others never came back. The war messed up Katherine's plans in ways she had not expected. The overseer Virgil Kane joined the Confederate Army in 1861 and was killed at Shiloh in April 1862. Finding someone new was hard. Most healthy white men were at war. Katherine finally hired an old man named Silas Kendrick, who was too old to fight. Kendrick was not as cruel as Kane, but he was also not as good at keeping control. The enslaved people at Thornhill Estate began to feel the change in power. News came through the secret networks that linked plantations. Whispered news of Union wins, rumors that Lincoln had made a proclamation freeing enslaved people in the South, thoughts about what would happen if the Yankees came. Katherine tightened her grip as much as she could. She kept the enslaved people on the plantation, not allowing anyone to leave, not even to see family on other properties. She gave them slightly more food to make them less likely to run, and she sped up her breeding program, forcing some of the children into matches earlier than she had planned. Jonathan, her oldest son, turned 15 in December 1862. Katherine decided he was old enough. She had picked a young woman named Rachel, 16 years old, the daughter of a field hand. Rachel had no choice. In February 1863, Katherine had Jonathan and Rachel married in a service she led herself in the main house. It was a fake wedding with no legal power, done only to make the breeding match look proper. Jonathan, who had been raised separate from the others and taught to see Katherine as his protector, accepted this without a single question. He had no idea what had been done to him, no idea that Katherine was his real mother, no idea how deeply wrong it all was. Rachel, scared into silence, said nothing, but others in the quarters were watching. They saw Katherine matching these special children, the ones from the main house, with the other enslaved young people. They knew this was the next step in whatever Katherine had been planning for all these years, and a quiet, desperate anger started to grow in the quarters, an anger that had nowhere to go until things finally changed for them. The spring of 1863 brought awful news to Burke County. The Confederacy was losing badly. The Union Army controlled the Mississippi River after Vicksburg fell. In July, Lee's attack on Pennsylvania failed at Gettysburg. Shortages of food, fabric, and basic goods made life hard, even for white plantation families. For the enslaved people, life got even harder as Katherine rationed everything more strictly. But something else was happening at Thornhill, something Katherine tried hard to hide from everyone. The children she had been breeding were learning the truth about who their parents were. It started with Alelina, Katherine's second child, now 14. She had always been the most watchful of Katherine's children, the one who asked hard questions. In May 1863, while helping Katherine sort papers, Alelina found one of the coded journals that Katherine had left unlocked by mistake. Alelina had learned to read from Katherine. She was smart, curious, and bored with the few books in the house. The journal's code fascinated her. She spent 3 weeks working on it secretly, just as Richard had 16 years before, slowly figuring out the code. What she found shattered her whole world. The journal described her own creation. Second planting with rootstock 2. Thomas, age 21, excellent physical specimen, strong back, good teeth, weather warm, anticipate harvest in late October 1848. Alelina read the words over and over, her hands trembling. Rootstock 2, Thomas. She knew Thomas. He was one of the field hands, a quiet man in his 30s who never looked anyone in the eye. He was her father. Katherine was her mother. She was not an orphan raised by a kind woman. She was the product of Katherine's cold breeding plan. The truth washed over Alelina's mind. If it was true for her, it was true for Jonathan, for Abigail, for all the children Katherine had in the house. They were Katherine's biological children, fathered by enslaved men, and they had been lied to their whole lives. Even worse, the journal showed Katherine's plans for their futures. Alelina read the notes about pairings, about expected babies, about making a workforce that would sustain itself. She saw her own name on a chart, linked by a line to someone named Marcus Isaacson, to be born 1862. Pairing with Alelina anticipated 1865. Alelina felt sick. Katherine planned to force her to be with a boy who wasn't even born yet, to make her have children who would be enslaved here forever. To turn her into another breeding tool, she confronted Katherine that night, her voice shaking with anger and fear. "I read your journal. I know what you are. I know what I am." Katherine's face became still, her eyes like ice. "You should not have done that, Alelina. You're my mother, Thomas is my father, and you've been planning to breed us like animals." Alelina could hardly get the words out. "Sit down," Katherine ordered. "No, sit down." The threat in Katherine's voice was clear. Alelina sat, her body shaking. Katherine walked around the room, her mind clearly trying to solve the new problem of Alelina. Finally, she spoke. "You are smart enough to know the position we are in, so I will be direct. Yes, I am your biological mother. Yes, I have been running a program to create a lasting workforce for this estate. And yes, you and the others will take part in that program when you are old enough." "I won't," Alelina said, but her voice was weak. "You will. Because the other choice is much worse." Katherine leaned in, her face close to Alelina's. "Right now you live in this house, you eat good food, you wear good clothes, you can read. What do you think happens if you refuse to help? I sell you. I sell you to a plantation in Alabama or Mississippi where they work people to death in 5 years, where women are hurt all the time. where knowing how to read gets you a whipping or worse. Is that what you want?" Elena said nothing, tears running down her face. "I didn't think so," Katherine straightened up. "You will not talk about this with your brothers or sisters. You will not talk about it with anyone in the quarters. You will keep living your life just as you did before. And when it is time for you to do your part for this family's future, you will do it. Do you understand?" "Yes," Elena whispered. But Katherine had made a huge mistake. She had told the truth without controlling the situation. Elena did talk to others. Not right away, but slowly, carefully. She told Jonathan first, showing him the journal pages she had memorized. Jonathan's reaction was not like Elena's. He had been so completely shaped by Katherine, so cut off from any other way of seeing the world that he had trouble seeing what was wrong. "She gave us a better life," Jonathan said, confused by his sister's anger. "We could have been in the fields. Instead, we're here. We're property, Jonathan. We're slaves. Our own mother enslaved us. She's protecting us. She's keeping us together. If we were sold, we'd be split up, sent to different places. This way, we stay together. We stay at Thornhill." Aina realized with horror that Jonathan had been brainwashed too well. He couldn't see the trap Katherine had built, but Abigail, 13 years old and very sharp, understood right away when Elena told her. And Margaret, at 12, understood too. The younger children were still too little to get it, but the older ones, they knew now. They knew what they were and what Katherine planned for them. This knowledge changed the feeling in the main house. Katherine felt it. The shift in the air, the new way her children looked at her. There was fear, but also something else. A coldness, a waiting. They were waiting for their chance, and Katherine knew it. She thought about what to do. She could sell the older children and get rid of the problem, but that would waste years of work. She could punish them badly enough to break them, but that might damage them for the breeding program. She needed them healthy. So Katherine picked a different way. She would show them what happened to those who disobeyed, using someone else. In August 1863, a young woman named Grace tried to run away from Thornhill. She was 17, pregnant, and desperate. She had been matched with a field hand against her will, and she could not stand the idea of having a child in this system. She ran at night, heading east, hoping to cross the Savannah River into South Carolina and get to Union lines. She was caught in 12 hours. The dogs found her at a creek 3 miles away. She was brought back and locked in a shed. The next morning, Katherine gathered everyone, all the enslaved people, including her special children, in the yard. Grace was brought out, her hands tied. Katherine stood on the porch, her face blank. "This woman tried to abandon her duties to this estate and to all of you. She tried to destroy the family we have built. The punishment for such a betrayal must be harsh." What happened next was cruel. Grace was whipped in front of everyone, 20 lashes given by the old overseer, Kendrick, who did the job with a heavy heart. Katherine made all the children watch, even her own. The message was clear. This is what happens to those who try to leave. But Katherine had messed up again. The public punishment did not scare the enslaved people into obeying. Instead, it made something clear to them. Katherine was willing to use terrible violence to keep her control, which meant she was afraid. And if she was afraid, it meant they had more power than they thought. Whispers started moving through the quarters in the following weeks. Whispers about waiting for the right time. Whispers about what would happen when the war ended, because it had to end and the Yankees had to come south and things had to change. All they needed to do was survive until then. Elena heard these whispers. She started spending time near the quarters when Katherine wasn't looking. She built relationships with the other enslaved people she had been kept away from. She learned things Katherine never told her, about her father, Thomas, about the other men Katherine had used, about the women who had died or been broken by Katherine's plan. One evening in October, Elena met with a group of older enslaved women in the woods. They sat in a circle in the dark, talking in low voices. A woman named Hope, in her 40s, looked at Elena with a mix of pity and respect. "Your mama. She thinks she made something special," Hope said quietly. "Thinks she made a family. All she did was make people who hate her in ways she can't even picture." "What happens when the war ends?" Elena asked. "Depends on who wins," Hope answered. "Yankees win, we're free. Confederates win, things stay the same or get worse. But no matter what, your mama can't keep doing this. Too many people know, too many people are angry. Something has to break." "What if we made it break?" Elena asked. The women looked at her, surprised. Hope leaned in. "What are you saying, child? What if we didn't wait for the war to end? What if we ended this ourselves?" The idea hung in the air, risky and exciting. One of the younger women, Anna, spoke. "You talking about running, taking everyone and running? Or fighting?" Elena said. "There's only Mrs. Katherine and old Mr. Kendrick. There are 40 of us. And 20 of them are children," Hope said, being practical. "And where would we go? Confederates catch runaways. They kill us or sell us south. And you think they're going to see you as one of us or one of them?" The question hurt because Elena didn't know the answer. She was Catherine's daughter. She grew up in the main house. She could read. Her skin was lighter. Would they even accept her if it came to a fight? Before Elena could answer, they heard footsteps in the woods. Everyone scattered, vanishing into the night. Elena ran back to the main house, her heart racing, wondering if someone had heard them, if Katherine would find out, if it was all about to fall apart. But no punishment came. The end. Next day was normal, and the day after. It seemed they hadn't been caught, but the idea was planted. The idea that they didn't have to just wait for others to free them. They could act. That idea started to spread through the quarters like a sickness. Katherine felt the change but couldn't tell where it was coming from. She watched them more closely, had Kendrick walk the quarters at night, and limited their movement even more. The tension at Thornhill estate got thicker every week. It was like watching a storm gather. Dark clouds, electricity in the air, everyone waiting for the first strike. The break came in March 1864, but not how anyone thought it would. A group of Confederate soldiers came through Burke County, taking supplies from plantations, food, horses, cloth, anything they could use. Katherine had to give them what they wanted. She gave them corn, cured meat, and 2 of the plantation's horses. The soldiers only stayed one night, camping in the fields, and left at sunrise. But their visit had an effect. The soldiers talked freely about the war. The news was bad for the South. Sherman was pushing through Georgia. Union armies were closing in. Some soldiers talked like the war was already lost, about going home, about how it was impossible to keep fighting. The enslaved people at Thornhill Estate heard it all. Hope rushed through the quarters. Freedom was coming. It might be months or weeks, but it was on its way. All they had to do was hold on. Except Katherine, feeling this hope and scared of what it meant for her plans, decided to do something extreme. If the Confederacy lost, if the enslaved people were freed, everything she built would fall apart. Her special children would leave. Her program would end. 16 years of work would be for nothing. She could not let that happen. On the night of March 17, 1864, Katherine brought her biological children together in the main house. Jonathan, Elena, Abigail, Margaret, Samuel, William, Henry, Caroline, and the 3 youngest babies. 11 children in all, from 16 years old down to 6 months. "Things are going to change soon," Katherine told them. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were wild. "The war may end badly. The Yankees may come. They may try to take you from me to destroy our family. I cannot let that happen." Elena's blood ran cold. "What are you planning?" "Going to protect our future," Katherine said. "Tonight." She led them to the heritage room, the room none of them, except maybe Jonathan, had ever entered. Katherine lit the lamps, showing the shelves of journals, the bottles of hair, the family trees on the walls. "This is our legacy," Katherine said. "This is what we built. No one will take it from us." From a locked cabinet, Katherine took out a small wooden box. Inside were bottles of clear liquid. "This is a medicine called laudanum," she said. "In small amounts, it stops pain. In larger amounts, it gives eternal rest." Abigail gasped. "You want to poison us?" "I want to protect you," Katherine snapped, her voice getting desperate. "If the Yankees come, if they free the others, where will you go? You're not white enough for their world. You're not black enough in their eyes. You'll be nothing, owned by no one, belonging nowhere. Is that better than staying here together with me?" "Yes," Elena said, her voice firm. "Anything is better than this." Katherine's face grew hard. "You're too young to know, all of you are, but I am your mother, and I know what is best." She reached for the bottles, but Jonathan stepped in front of her. He was 16, almost as tall as she was, and his face had changed. "No," he said very quietly. "Jonathan, don't be a fool. You understand the plan. You always have." "I understood what you told me," Jonathan said. "But Elena showed me the journals. I read what you wrote about us, about Father Isaac, about Father Thomas, about all of them. I know what you did. I know what you are." "I am your mother." "You're a monster," Jonathan said, his voice cracking. Katherine slapped him hard. The sound echoed in the room. "How dare you, after all I've given you?" "You gave us nothing," Elena said, moving to stand with Jonathan. "You used people. You destroyed them. You destroyed us." Katherine looked at her children, truly seeing them for the first time. They were all against her. Even the little ones who didn't fully get it stood with their older siblings. She had lost them. In that second, Katherine made one last, frantic choice. If she couldn't keep her children, if they were going to turn on her and ruin everything, then she would at least save the proof of what she had done. Future generations would know what Katherine Thornnehill had made, even if the creation itself failed. She grabbed the journals, the charts, the bottles of hair, holding them to her chest. "You think you can escape me? You think you can act like this never happened? These records will last. They'll prove what I built. They'll prove I was right." She pushed past her children and ran from the room, carrying the evidence of her crimes. Jonathan and Elena ran after her, but Katherine was faster, full of wild energy. She ran through the house, out the front door, and across the yard toward the quarters. What happened next is unclear. The stories told later would all be different, each person remembering it through their own pain. What we know is that Katherine reached the quarters holding her journals. What we know is that the enslaved people, woken by the noise, came out of their cabins. They saw the mistress who had tortured them for 16 years, running at them in the dark, clutching the proof of her evil. What we know is that someone, maybe Hope, maybe one of the men, maybe many people, decided that this was the moment. This was the end. Katherine Thornnehill vanished that night. Her journals were found spread in the mud. Pages were torn. The bottles of hair were broken. The charts were burned. And Katherine herself was just gone. Jonathan and Alina got to the quarters minutes later and found chaos. People were yelling, running. There was the sharp smell of smoke from a fire, but no Katherine. "Where is she?" Jonathan demanded. Hope looked at him with an expression he couldn't understand. "Gone, that's all you need to know. She's gone and she's not coming back." "What did you do to her?" "What she deserved," Hope said simply. "Now you have a choice, boy. You can make a fuss about your mama, or you can understand that justice was done here tonight and let it go." Jonathan looked at Alina. His sister's face was white, her eyes huge, but she nodded slowly. "Let it go," she whispered. The next morning, Katherine Thornnehill was reported as missing. Old Mr. Kendrick, the overseer, searched the land but found nothing. He told the sheriff in Waynesboro, who came to look. But the sheriff decided Mrs. Thornnehill had probably run away, scared of the Union Army. It was a good guess, given the state of the war. No one from the quarters said what happened. Jonathan, Alina, and the other children said nothing. The official files just say that Katherine Thornnehill disappeared on the night of March 17, 1864, and was never seen again. But everyone at Thornhill knew the truth, even if they never said it. Katherine had been killed that night. Her body was hidden somewhere on the 1,700 acres, and her children, her biological children, her legacy, had chosen to let her killers go free because they knew their mother had earned her end. The war ended 14 months later. General Sherman's army came through Georgia in late 1864, though they passed 30 miles north of Burke County and missed Thornhill. The Confederacy fell in April 1865. Freedom came to the enslaved people of Georgia through the Army, the 13th Amendment, and the simple fact that the system of slavery could not be held together anymore. At Thornhill, the change was messy. Jonathan, as Katherine's oldest, had some legal right to the land, but his status was unclear. He was legally enslaved, but also Katherine's son. Lawyer Talbert in Waynesboro tried to fix the mess, but finally quit. The property was stuck in a legal gray area. Most of the formerly enslaved people left Thornhill just weeks after they were freed. They spread out, looking for family who had been sold, looking for work in cities, or just getting as far away as they could from the place of their pain. Some stayed at first. Hope stayed, helping to organize the ones with nowhere to go. Thomas stayed, Alina's biological father. After 16 years, he was finally able to openly be her father. They had one talk about Katherine, about what was done to him and to her, and then they never talked about it again. The pain was too much. Alina stayed at Thornhill until 1867. In those years, she learned how to be a free person, though the mental scars from her childhood never went away. She eventually moved to Savannah, worked as a seamstress, and married a carpenter. She never had children. She never talked about her mother or her childhood. When she died in 1903, her death notice did not mention Thornhill estate. Jonathan stayed on the plantation longer, trying to farm the land with a few freedmen. But the cotton market was bad, the land was dead, and the property's story had begun to spread through the black community. By 1869, Jonathan gave up and left the estate. He drifted west, ending up in Texas under a new name. He died in 1891. Among his few things was a small notebook where he had written over and over, "I did not choose this. I did not choose this. I did not choose this." Thornhill estate itself fell apart quickly. The main house was partly burned in a mysterious fire in 1871. The other buildings rotted. The land was finally taken for unpaid taxes and sold in 1878 to a logging company that cut down the trees. But in 1871, something was found that brought the story back for a short time. A mandrill. A well on a nearby property broke through into an old cistern on what used to be Thornhill land. Inside the cistern, 30 feet down, was a skeleton. The bones were mostly whole. They belonged to a woman, maybe in her 30s or 40s. Bits of cloth hinted at a dress from the 1860s. A rusted locket found near the bones held two tiny pictures, a man and a young boy. The coroner in Waynesboro looked at the bones and said the woman had died from being hit hard in the head. The skeleton was buried in a nameless grave in the county cemetery. The official file listed the body only as unknown female, discovered former Thornhill property, 1871. But people in Burke County's black community knew who it was. The story had been passed down in whispers, in kitchens, and at church, in a coded way that protected the people who were there that night in 1864. They knew Katherine Thornnehill had been killed by the people she had enslaved and hurt. They knew her body was hidden in a deep well. They knew that a kind of justice had been served. Over the years, more information came out, but always in bits and pieces. In 1889, a man dying in Alabama told a minister he had helped murder his former mistress in Georgia during the war. He gave no name, but the minister wrote it down. In 1902, a woman in Savannah, Hope's granddaughter, wrote a short story that mentioned the night the devil mistress disappeared and nobody missed her. The strongest proof was found in 1923, when a historian looking at Burke County's war history found a box of letters in the courthouse. Among them was a letter from 1865 by Union Captain Samuel Reynolds, who led one of the first units into Burke County. Reynolds wrote, "We found disturbing evidence at a property called Thornhill Estate, signs of systematic breeding tests done by the late owner on enslaved persons, including her own biological children. The details are too awful to write in full, but multiple witnesses confirmed that the woman, Katherine Thornnehill, had run a program to create a self-making enslaved population. The witnesses also told us Mrs. Thornnehill vanished in March 1864, and though they would not say exactly what happened, their meaning was clear. I have chosen not to look into it further, as it seems to me that whatever justice was done to this woman was well-deserved. I have told my men to say nothing of what we learned here. The letter was filed and forgotten again until a student found it in 1954. She tried to check the story, talking to old residents of Burke County who might remember family stories. Most said they knew nothing. One woman, 93 years old, the great-granddaughter of one of the people enslaved at Thornhill, said only, "Some things happened that needed to happen. Some people did things that needed doing." And that's all that needs to be said. The last mystery of Thornhill is about the 23 children found in the basement. Captain Reynolds's official report mentions them, and so do letters from his soldiers. The children were freed and put with freedmen families in the area, but what happened to them after that is unknown. Some of them must have lived to be adults. Some likely had their own children. This means there are people alive today in Georgia or somewhere else who carry Katherine Thornnehill's DNA without knowing it. They might be related to Jonathan, or Alina, or one of the other children from the program. They might carry those same features, light green eyes, reddish hair, sharp cheekbones, that marked Katherine's children. They would never know their ancestor built her legacy on one of the most planned systems of cruelty in American history. They would never know they exist because a woman decided to treat people like animals. They would never know that their great-great-great-grandmother's body is in a nameless grave in Burke County, put there by the people she had tortured. People whose names we will never know because they protected each other's secrets even after they were free. The site of Thornhill Estate today is just fields and woods. There is no historical sign. No books about Burke County history mention the plantation. The house's foundation is still there if you know where to find it, buried under leaves. The old well where Katherine's body was hidden has long since caved in and filled with dirt. But the story lives on, passed down in the black community, whispered in family history groups, mentioned in academic papers. It lives on because it shows something true and terrible about American history. Not just the cruelty of slavery, but the ways people will excuse and organize cruelty when they have total power over others. Katherine Thornnehill told herself she was building something new, making a new model for plantations, saving her family's future. In reality, she was continuing and worsening one of mankind's greatest sins. And the people she used, the people she bred and controlled and hurt in the end, erased her from history just as completely as she had tried to erase their humanity. What are your thoughts on this story? Do you think the whole truth came out, or are there still things hidden in that Burke County land? The reality is, we might never learn everything that took place at Thornhill Estate. The people who went through it, the ones who survived, decided to take some secrets with them to the end. Perhaps they earned that right. Perhaps some stories should stay with the people who suffered through them, and not for historians or narrators like me. We can still respect them by recalling that their fight was important, that their survival was important, and that they lived longer than the system built to crush them. If this story affected you, or made you consider the secret histories in your own area, tell me in the comments. Share this with someone who likes to explore the darkest parts of America's past. Subscribe and hit the bell icon for more videos that will make you question what you know about history. And always keep in mind, the past is often much closer than we think. I'll see you in the next one.